This morning's scripture reading is found in Mark chapter 10. It's a little bit lengthy here. It's verses 35 through 52. So bear with me as we get started here. Verse 35 picks up with James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to him, Jesus, and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it that you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized also. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those whom it has already been prepared for." When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you must first be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." They then came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. This is the word of God for the people of God. Well, praise be indeed. Friends, welcome to the third Sunday in Lent. If you've been keeping track, it is indeed the third Sunday. And we're continuing on in our series that we've appropriately titled, Questions Jesus Asked. And last week we sat with the question that Jesus posed to Simon Peter at Philippi. And the question was, "Who do you say that I am?" And that question, while rooted in identity, is also deeply rooted in confession. More than that, it requires us to also take a second and acknowledge the difference between what our secondhand knowledge of Jesus is and our personal encounters that we crave to have with Jesus. And so this week we turn to a different question, one that Jesus asks twice within the same chapter. One that he asks to two very different groups of people. The question being, "What do you want me to do for you?" And so as I was sitting here thinking about this question this week, it reminds me a lot of the questions that we get asked in our daily lives, right? For us, Candice and I, we get asked this question whenever we go out to eat. And so Texas Roadhouse is our go-to restaurant. Usually on nights where neither Candice nor I want to cook, to break this down for you by the numbers, because we're numbers people, right? In 2025 alone, we went and ate at Texas Roadhouse 20 times. This year, if you've been keeping track and you've been following along, we've already eaten there 5 times, friends. It's insane. So you would think for us being practically regulars, we should be given like co-ownership, at least of the Dubuque one. You would think ordering for us would be simple. We know what we want. We should almost have the menu like memorized, but no, that is not the case. Every time we sit down, the same routine happens. So let me walk you through it. The rolls, if you've never been there, they have fresh rolls. Oh, they're so good. And cinnamon butter, which is also a sin in of itself, but there we are, friends. Those usually get set down with you as you get to your table. And Peyton has now taken it upon herself, being the older kid that she is, to go ahead and pass those out, along with divvying up who gets the cinnamon butter. And she recognizes that mom doesn't need any, but dad and Peyton deserve the 2 cups of cinnamon butter that come along with it. That's how you know true love there, friends. You've convinced your kid, right? And so by that time of Peyton finishing divvying up all these rolls, there's 4 rolls. She takes 2 for herself. Candice and I only get 1. That's the way it should be, I suppose. And by the time all of this happens, Candice and I, we've undone our jackets. We finally sat down. We finally pulled out the menus there. And the server comes, right? And the server immediately asks us about drinks and if we're ready to order. Now, I will tell you this. Absolutely. I know exactly what I'm getting. I know exactly what I want to order. I have it memorized. The only thing that changes is the weight and the cut of the steak. That's the only thing that changes. And it depends on how hungry I am and how much work that I want to do. If I really want to just slice into it like butter, strip steak every day. If I want to sit there and I want to cut it a little bit more, get that sirloin. But we're not here to discuss meat, right? Peyton usually, for the most part, knows what she wants because Candice and I, we usually limit down the menu for her. Occasionally, she'll pick something that will surprise us, but for the most part, we're just happy that she's eating to begin with, right? Which brings me to Candice. Now, she will argue otherwise, but she too orders the same thing with minor variations. Now, when we first got together, she would order this is how much I know about her, this is how you know it's true love, right? She would order the steak kebabs, which would come with rice and a loaded baked potato. Friends, are we getting hungry yet? Oh my goodness, we got donuts and stuff out in the lobby. It's not Texas Roadhouse, but it might as well be close, right? And she'll get that, but we started having consistency issues with the steak not being cooked all the way or being cooked too much. And so now she opts to get either the 6 or the 8-ounce sirloin with a loaded baked potato and a various side on top of that. Medium rare, of course, for the steak, which is the way the good Lord intended it, just like me. But if she doesn't take a second and look over that menu every single time, like it is the very first time she has ever sat down in that restaurant, I might get nervous that the person sitting across from me isn't my wife. It's usually by the 3rd time that the server comes that we are ready and official to go and order our food. See, the moment somebody asks us, "What do you want?" reveals quite a bit about us. It reveals a little bit about what we've been thinking about. It reveals maybe what our hope is in that moment or what our dreams are. I dream of a steak that is just the most perfect thing in the world, and I get it almost every single time. But maybe for you, it might bring a sense of what might give you joy in that moment. Whatever it is, in that moment when we get asked that question itself will reveal what is waiting just beneath the surface. And so in Mark chapter 10, Jesus asks this same question to 2 very different groups of people, right? First, he asks it to James and John, 2 of his closest disciples. But then he also asks it to a blind beggar named Bartimaeus who's sitting outside along the road of Jericho. And Jesus asks this question to both groups, but he gets 2 very different answers. And those answers reveal everything about what each group has been carrying up to this point. And so that is what we're exploring today. If you were hoping for a conversation about different cuts of steak or meat or things like that, I assure you, you can find me after the service. We'll have that conversation. But today, we're talking about these questions, not just what we ask for, but what our asking reveals about us. Jesus is on the road to Jerusalem. Let's set the stage here, right? So they're walking along, and he has just told his disciples now for the 3rd time that he is going to suffer, be rejected, and be killed. And Jesus himself can see the cross directly in front of him. He knows where he is marching towards. The disciples have heard this announcement 3 times, and 3 times now they have failed to understand the bigger picture. And in this moment, James and John approach with this request. And now this story gets told 2 different ways. There's a version in Mark and there's a version in Matthew. In the version of Matthew, they bring their mother along, which is just the best timing to ask about where you're going to sit in heaven with your mother there. And so they start off this conversation by asking for pretty much a blank check. In verse 35, it goes, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." Friends, let me tell you, that is a bold line to open with any pastor or priest ever, right? I need you to agree with whatever it is that I'm going to ask you to do, pastor, but you don't get to say no, right? And that's what they're wanting. It's a bold opening. They haven't even said what they want yet, and they're asking Jesus to just go ahead and grant it to them in advance. Jesus doesn't give them a blank check because he is much wiser than probably what I am, and instead he asks this question in verse 36, "What do you want me to do for you?" And we're told that their answer comes relatively quickly, without even skipping a beat. In verse 37, they said, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." In this moment, these two disciples believe that they are asking a pretty clear question. They've been dreaming about their position, their proximity to power, if you will. Their judgment for even asking the question is clouded because they are more worried about the throne than they are about the big picture. While Jesus has been out here talking about pain and suffering, they have been dreaming about status. While Jesus has been describing the cup of judgment that he's about to drink, they've been measuring the seats in heaven to make sure that they're big enough for them. Jesus tells them plainly, "Listen, friends, you don't know what you're asking." And then he asks another question. "Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" Which is a tongue twister if you have to say that a lot, right? But it's important to note the imagery that's being used here, right? So we're going to take a second and pause. The cup is not the cup of the Last Supper. The cup is, according to the prophets, the cup of God's judgment. The baptism is not being baptized in the Jordan, right? Not being baptized by John the Baptist. The baptism itself is that of death. Jesus is asking if they're really ready to go where he's going. And they say, yes. They say, we are able to. And perhaps, we'll give a little bit of grace, maybe they do mean it. Maybe they do believe it. But I personally don't think they've understood what they just agreed to. Jesus tells them that they will indeed drink of the cup. They are going to share in his suffering. We know this because James is going to be the first apostle that's going to be martyred. John will be exiled to an island called Patmos. But the seats that they're asking for are not his to give just willy-nilly upon request. Those belong to the ones with whom his Father has prepared them for. And then we're told, this is the best part, right? Drama exists with men in groups of 12. The other 10 disciples hear about this, and we're told they become mad, like furious. With a little bit of insight, right? We're told that they're not mad because they viewed the request as inappropriate. They're angry with James and John because they beat them to the punch. The other 10 disciples, they were wanting to ask this question too. The same ambition was living amongst the 12. They're not mad that this is an incredibly inappropriate and insensitive time to be asking Jesus about the kingdom of heaven. He just told us that he's going to die again, but sure, let's worry about that. No, they're upset because James and John decided to ask it earlier than what they were planning on. And so Jesus, being the loving caretaker that he is, he gathers the whole group together, and in verse 42 reframes the conversation. He says, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them, but it is not so among you." See, in the kingdom that Jesus is trying to build, greatness doesn't look like domination. It looks much more like service. Whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first must become a slave of all. And then Jesus offers himself up as a model in verse 45. He says, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Friends, Jesus knows that he is walking towards that cross. He is not walking towards a throne. He is not walking towards overthrowing the entire Roman Empire. He is walking towards death. And he is inviting his disciples to follow. And so then the scene shifts a little bit. Jesus and his disciples, were told, they arrive at Jericho. And as they're leaving the city, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus is sitting along the roadside. And when he hears that Jesus is passing by, he starts shouting, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And the crowd there, they're trying to silence him. They're telling him to be quiet. But like a good person, when you get told to be quiet, you usually scream a little bit louder. So Bartimaeus, he starts shouting a little bit louder. He refuses to let this moment pass. In the words of the great philosopher Eminem, you only get one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime, And I can tell there's only a few people that are going to get that reference in here, but that's okay. That's okay. The ones who get it, this is for you. I got you. Jesus stops in this moment, right? And he calls out to Bartimaeus. And then he asks the same question he asked James and John in verse 51. What do you want me to do for you? And Bartimaeus, he does not miss this chance. He doesn't ask for the right hand of God. He doesn't ask for an increase in status or an increase in his position or for power or any of that. He says, "My teacher, let me see again." And in that moment, Bartimaeus reveals that he isn't thinking about thrones or glory. He isn't wondering about his position in heaven. He's coming with the only longing that has been on his heart the whole time. The one thing that he believes has been missing for him the whole life. He just wants to see. And that kind of honest, desperate prayer is exactly what Jesus has been waiting for in this moment. And we're told that Jesus grants it, right? Jesus says, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately, Bartimaeus receives his sight. And then Mark adds this little detail, this little caveat at the very end of it that we don't see in the other stories. He followed Jesus on the way. On the road to Jerusalem, the road to the cross, he didn't just receive this gift and walk away, he followed Jesus. It is likely that when Jesus was crucified, Bartimaeus likely would have still been in the town. Bartimaeus could have easily spoke up and said, "This man gave me sight." Bartimaeus likely was there for the crucifixion. But again, the same question comes with two very different answers. James and John have been thinking about glory, have been wanting to be elevated in their status, but Bartimaeus has been thinking about mercy. He just wants to be healed. One request comes from ambition, and the other one stems from a very real need. Now, it is important to note here that while it is easy for us as outsiders to look at James and John and say, "What a dumb time to ask that question," right? And to really rebuke them and get on top of them, it's important to also note what Jesus did. Jesus never once rebuked James and John for asking the question. He very well could have. And we can acknowledge, like I said, the timing of this is just terrible. This is like the worst time to be asking this question. But their request on top of their asking also revealed to Jesus how much they still didn't understand what Jesus was doing. But Jesus doesn't shame them. Instead, he uses this moment to teach them something about what greatness actually looks like in the kingdom of God. But he honored Bartimaeus' request immediately because it came from a place of honest desperation. Bartimaeus knew what he lacked. He knew that he wouldn't be able to fix this himself. And when Jesus asked what he wanted, Bartimaeus opted to tell the truth. The question, friends, "What do you want me to do for you?" is an invitation. It exposes what we have been carrying. It reveals what's been sitting just beneath the surface. And how we answer says everything about where and how our hearts are. Friends, Jesus is still very much asking this question. what do you want me to do for you? And how we answer reveals what's been on our hearts. Friends, if Jesus asked you that question right now, what would you say? My hope for you would be that it's not the answer that you think sounds right in that moment. And my hope would also be that it's not the one that you'd give if you were afraid of other people listening in. I'm talking about the honest answer. The one that you've maybe never said out loud because you weren't sure if it was really okay to ask that question. The one that's been sitting in the back of your mind for weeks now at a time. Maybe it's the thing you've been wanting but haven't really known how to ask for. Or maybe you've felt like you weren't allowed to ask for it because somehow naming it out loud would make you seem less spiritual. But friends, Jesus is not offended by our desires. He isn't waiting for us to clean up our prayer life before we bring them to him. He asked James and John, the same question he asked Bartimaeus. And he gave them both room to answer. The difference wasn't in the question that Jesus asked, it was what they asked for as a response. This week, I encourage us to be honest with our requests to God. To bring those. Not a polished request, not one that sounds spiritual enough to be brought out in public prayer, right? An honest one. What do you actually want? What do you actually need? Friends, I encourage you to say it out loud this week if you have to, but not just say it out loud because that's only one step, right? It also requires us to examine it. It requires us to ask for position, for wholeness. Perhaps for you, you're asking for elevation instead of mercy. Flip that around. There's nothing wrong, friends, with wanting to be used by God. There's nothing wrong with ambition that stems from wanting to serve others. But when the desire for status quietly replaces that need for healing, then we, friends, have drifted somewhere that we did not mean to go. Jesus invites honest prayer. Friends, he didn't punish James and John for their requests. He didn't shame them either. Instead, he takes what could have been an embarrassing moment and turns it into an opportunity. He redirects their question. He teaches them something that they couldn't have learned in any other way. But he also honors Bartimaeus' request right there on the spot. Because Bartimaeus came with nothing to offer except his need. He wasn't positioning himself. He wasn't seeking elevation. He was desperate. And friends, sometimes in desperation, we find holy places. And it turns out that in desperation itself is a fine place to pray from. Bartimaeus threw off his cloak and then he ran to Jesus. He didn't hesitate. He knew exactly what he needed and he wasn't afraid to ask for it. That kind of boldness is rare. We might look at that and be a little bit jealous. Most of us, we try to pull our prayers back. Some of us, we try to qualify our prayers. Bartimaeus just flat out asked. That kind of honesty is what Jesus is looking for. When the server comes to your table and asks, "What would you like?" Some of us, we are ready. But some of us, we need just a little bit more time. But eventually, in order for us to get what we want, we have to answer the question. Jesus, friends, is standing in front of you and he is asking you, what do you want me to do for you? Don't ask for a throne when you need healing. Don't ask for glory when what you need is mercy. Come with those real requests because I assure you, Jesus can handle it. Whatever you have been carrying, whatever's been on your heart, whatever you've been too afraid to bring to him, I assure you that Jesus is not intimidated by your honesty. He is not going to be thrown off by your need or your request. If anything, friends, he has been waiting for you to finally say it out loud. So tell him the truth and see what he does with it. Amen.